What if the reason you're still suffering is because you won't let go? Not because life is unfair, not because people betrayed you, not because things didn't work out the way you wanted, but because you're still holding on to the relationship that's already dead, holding on to the version of yourself that no longer exists, holding on to the plan that clearly fell apart. You replay it in your head, you analyze it, you try to fix it, you try to control it, and the harder you grip, the more it hurts. Here's the truth nobody likes to hear. Sometimes there's nothing left to do. No conversation will fix it. No explanation will rewind it. No revenge will heal it. Sometimes the only move left is to let go. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that suffering doesn't come from loss itself. It comes from resisting loss, from demanding that reality be different than it is, from arguing with what already happened. And reality always wins. So this episode isn't about positive thinking. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about facing the hardest lesson in Stoicism, the one that requires real strength. Letting go. Letting go of control. Letting go of attachment. Letting go of ego. Letting go of the story you keep telling yourself. Because sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing things. It comes from releasing them. And here's the real question. If you stopped fighting what already is, who would you become? 1. The illusion of control. If you really sit with it, you'll realize that most of your exhaustion doesn't come from what happened. It comes from your attempt to control what already happened. That's the part we don't like admitting. We tell ourselves we're just trying to fix things or make it work. But deep down, what we're really doing is resisting reality. We're replaying conversations in our heads, rewriting outcomes, imagining better endings, thinking that if we just analyze it one more time, we'll finally regain control. But control over what exactly? The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that human beings suffer less from events and more from their demand that events be different. You want someone to understand you, and when they don't, it unsettles you. You want the relationship to last, and when it ends, it feels like something was stolen from you. You want the plan to unfold exactly the way you envisioned it, and when it collapses, you feel personally attacked by life itself. But the deeper question is this: were those things ever truly under your control to begin with? You can influence, you can act, you can try, but outcomes, those belong to a much larger system than your personal will. Other people have their own minds, their own fears, their own desires. Circumstances shift. Timing changes. The world moves independently of your preferences. And yet we behave as if reality owes us alignment. That's where the illusion lives. It feels safer to believe that if we just try harder, push more, think smarter, we can force the world into the shape we want. Because if everything is controllable, then nothing is random, nothing is uncertain, nothing can surprise us. And uncertainty is terrifying. So we cling to control like it's oxygen. But here's what the Stoics would say: the more you try to control what isn't yours, the more you lose control of what is. While you're obsessing over someone else's decision, you're neglecting your own peace. While you're fighting the past, you're ignoring the present. While you're trying to manage every possible future outcome, you're draining the only thing you truly own, your response. Real power begins the moment you draw a hard line between what belongs to you and what doesn't. Your thoughts, your actions, your effort, that's yours. The rest isn't. And the moment you fully accept that, something shifts. The tension drops. The mental noise softens. You stop wrestling with the wind. This doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop attaching your stability to things that were never stable. You still show up. You still act with integrity. You still give your best effort. But you release the outcome. Because once you understand that control was mostly an illusion, you stop fighting reality and start mastering yourself instead. And that's where Stoicism begins, not in controlling the world, but in reclaiming the only territory that was ever truly yours. 2. Why holding on feels safer. If letting go is so powerful, why does it feel so terrifying? That's the real question. Because deep down, you already know there are things you should release. A relationship that's draining you, an expectation that keeps disappointing you, a version of yourself that no longer fits who you're becoming. And yet, you hold on. Not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. And familiarity feels safe. The mind would rather cling to known pain than step into unknown space. At least when you're holding on, you understand the pattern. You know how the arguments go. You know how the disappointment feels. You know the rhythm of the struggle. It hurts, but it's predictable. And predictability gives the illusion of stability. Letting go, on the other hand, opens a gap, a silence, a space where you don't yet know what comes next. And that space feels like falling. The Stoics understood something most people ignore. We are more afraid of uncertainty than we are of suffering. Suffering at least gives us something solid to grip. Uncertainty forces us to stand without support. So, instead of releasing what clearly isn't working, we negotiate with it. We tell ourselves, maybe it will change. Maybe if we try one more time. Maybe if we explain ourselves better. Maybe if we wait. But often what we're really saying is, I'm afraid of what happens if I stop holding on. Because if you let go of the relationship, who are you without it? If you let go of the dream, who are you without that identity? If you let go of the resentment, who are you without the story that justified your anger? Holding on isn't just about the thing, it's about the version of yourself attached to it. And that's why it feels safer. The ego loves attachments because they define it. They give it shape. They give it narrative. This is my person. This is my goal. This is my plan. When those attachments start breaking down, it doesn't just feel like loss. It feels like erasure, like you're losing a piece of yourself. But here's what the Stoics would gently remind you. You were never the attachment. You were never the outcome. You were never the relationship. You were never the role. Those were experiences, chapters, situations. They were not your identity. And the moment you begin separating who you are from what you're holding on to, the fear starts loosening. Because now letting go doesn't mean disappearing. It means evolving. What makes holding on feel safe is the belief that without it, you'll collapse. But look at your life. Every time something ended that you thought you couldn't survive, you adapted, you reshaped, you continued. The mind forgets this. It dramatizes the present moment as if it's final, but nothing in your life so far has been final. It's all been transitional. The Stoics trained themselves to see every attachment as temporary, not to become cold, but to become steady, to love without clinging, to strive without desperation, to engage fully, knowing nothing is guaranteed. And once you internalize that, something shifts. You realize holding on isn't safety, it's resistance. And the real safety, the deeper kind, comes from knowing that even if you release what you're gripping, you'll still be standing, because you were never being held up by it in the first place. 3. Attachment is the root of suffering. If you look closely at any pain you're carrying right now, you'll probably find attachment sitting quietly underneath it. Not the event itself, not what happened, but your attachment to how it was supposed to be. You weren't just hurt because someone left. You were hurt because you were attached to the future you imagined with them. You weren't just disappointed because you failed. You were attached to the identity of being the one who succeeds. You're not even angry about the words that were said. You're attached to the image of being respected, understood, validated. Attachment is subtle. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It convinces you that something external is essential to your stability, that without this person, this outcome, this recognition, you are somehow incomplete. The Stoics saw attachment as the invisible chain, not love, not ambition, not goals, but the belief that your peace depends on them. There's nothing wrong with loving someone. There's nothing wrong with wanting to succeed. The suffering begins when your emotional survival becomes tied to the result. When you move from, "I prefer this," to, "I cannot be okay without this," that's when attachment turns into dependency. And dependency creates fear. Because the moment you attach your well-being to something outside you, you've handed your nervous system to uncertainty. You've given external circumstances the power to destabilize your inner world. And since everything external is temporary, your peace becomes temporary too. The Stoics didn't say, "Don't care." They said, "Care wisely, engage fully, but remember that everything you engage with exists in a state of change. People change, bodies change, success changes, feelings change. Life itself is fluid. Attachment tries to freeze what is fluid. It tries to lock a moment in place and demand that it stay. But reality moves. And when reality moves and you refuse to move with it, friction begins. That friction is suffering. Think about how much energy it takes to mentally argue with what already happened, to replay it, to wish it different, to hold on to the version of life that no longer exists. That's attachment refusing to update itself. But the Stoics practiced something radical. They trained themselves to see everything as borrowed, not in a cold way, in a grateful way. This relationship is borrowed. This success is borrowed. This body is borrowed. This moment is borrowed. And when something is borrowed, you appreciate it deeply while it's here. But when it's time to return it, you don't collapse. That's the difference between love and attachment. Love says, "I'm grateful you're here." Attachment says, "You must stay for me to be okay." One creates connection, the other creates fear. When you loosen attachment, you don't become detached from life. You become more present in it, because you're no longer trying to secure it. You're experiencing it. And here's the quiet truth the Stoics understood. Suffering doesn't come from losing things. It comes from believing those things were yours permanently. Nothing in life was promised to stay. And once you truly understand that, you stop trying to own what was only ever passing through. You start holding life with open hands instead of clenched fists. And that's where letting go begins to feel less like loss and more like alignment. 4. You don't own anything. This is one of the hardest truths to accept, and also one of the most liberating. You don't actually own anything. Not in the way you think you do. You say, "My house, my partner, my body, my career, my reputation." The language itself creates the illusion of ownership. It makes everything feel permanent, secured, guaranteed. But if you step back for a moment and look honestly, you'll see that everything you call mine is something you're temporarily experiencing. Your body changes without asking your permission. Your health can shift overnight. People enter your life and leave it, sometimes gently, sometimes abruptly. Jobs disappear. Economies shift. Even your own personality evolves over time. What you love at 20 may not be what you love at 40. The self you are today is not the same self you were 10 years ago. So what exactly are you owning? The Stoics approached life with a quiet understanding that everything external is on loan, not to create anxiety, but to create perspective. When something is on loan, you take care of it, you appreciate it, you use it wisely, but you don't build your identity around its permanence. This shift changes everything. When you believe you own something, you cling to it. You fear losing it. You fight desperately when it begins to slip. But when you understand that you're simply a temporary steward of experiences, the grip softens. You can love deeply without demanding forever. You can work hard without believing success defines you. You can enjoy what you have without panicking at the thought of change. And here's the deeper layer. You don't even own your time. Every day that passes is one less day available to you. You didn't choose when you were born. You won't choose the exact moment you leave. Life is moving whether you approve of the speed or not. When you truly see this, entitlement begins to dissolve. Gratitude takes its place. The Stoics practiced something called negative visualization, imagining the loss of what they had, not to become morbid, but to become awake. To remind themselves that the person sitting next to them, the health they enjoy, the stability they experience, none of it is guaranteed. And instead of making them anxious, this awareness made them calmer. Because if nothing is truly owned, then nothing is truly stolen when it changes. It was always temporary. You were always just passing through it, and it through you. This doesn't make life less meaningful. It makes it more meaningful. When you stop pretending things are permanent, you stop postponing appreciation. You stop saying, "I'll value this later." You realize later isn't promised. You also stop building your identity around possessions and positions. Because if those shift, and they will, your sense of self won't collapse with them. Letting go becomes easier when you understand you were never holding permanent property. You were holding moments, and moments are meant to move. The suffering comes from trying to turn moments into monuments. But life is not stone, it's water. And once you accept that you don't own anything in the absolute sense, a strange freedom emerges. You can participate fully without clinging. You can engage without demanding guarantees. You can love without possession. You begin to live lightly, not careless, not detached from meaning, but detached from illusion. And that's when letting go stops feeling like losing something that was yours, and starts feeling like releasing something that was simply passing through your hands. 5. Amor fati. Love what happens. It's one thing to accept what happens. It's another thing entirely to love it. And that's where Stoicism becomes radical. Most people can eventually tolerate reality. They say, "It is what it is," but inside, they're still resisting, still wishing it had gone differently, still holding a quiet resentment toward life for not following the script they had in mind. But amor fati, love of fate, asks for something deeper. It asks you not just to endure what happens, but to embrace it as necessary. Not because everything that happens is pleasant, not because pain is enjoyable, but because whatever happened, happened, and reality does not reverse itself. The Stoics understood that every moment you spend wishing the past were different is a moment spent arguing with something that no longer exists, and that argument drains you. It keeps you stuck in a loop of if only. If only I had said this. If only they had done that. If only it worked out. But the truth is, the moment already unfolded the only way it could have unfolded, given who you were, who they were, and the circumstances at that time. Amor fati is the decision to stop seeing events as personal attacks and start seeing them as part of a larger unfolding. When something painful happens, your first instinct is rejection. This shouldn't have happened. But what if it had to? What if that ending was the only way you would grow into the next version of yourself? What if that failure was the redirection you couldn't see at the time? Loving fate doesn't mean liking every detail. It means trusting that your life is not broken just because it didn't go according to plan. Think about your past, the moments you once labeled disasters, the breakup, the rejection, the collapse of a dream. How many of them quietly reshaped you in ways you now depend on? The strength you have today likely came from something you once resisted, but in the moment, you fought it. That's natural. The ego wants control. It wants predictable outcomes. It wants guarantees. But life doesn't operate on guarantees. It operates on change. When you adopt amor fati, something powerful happens. You stop dividing life into good events and bad events. You start seeing everything as material, everything as training, everything as part of the architecture of your growth. You lose the job? Material. The relationship ends? Material. You succeed unexpectedly? Material. It all becomes part of the same process. And when you see life this way, resentment begins to fade. You no longer need to rewrite your story. You no longer need to cling to the version that didn't happen. You begin to cooperate with your life instead of resisting it. There is a quiet confidence in someone who practices amor fati. They don't crumble when things shift. They adjust. They adapt. They trust that whatever is happening now is the next necessary chapter. Because loving fate doesn't mean believing everything is perfect. It means believing nothing is wasted. And once you internalize that, letting go becomes less about losing something and more about accepting that the story is still unfolding, even when it unfolds differently than you expected. 6. Letting go is not giving up. One of the biggest misunderstandings about letting go is that it looks like surrender. From the outside, it can seem like weakness, like you stopped fighting, like you didn't try hard enough. And because we're raised to admire persistence, to push through, to never quit, the idea of letting go feels almost like betrayal of our goals, of our identity, of the effort we already invested. But Stoicism makes an important distinction. There is a difference between persistence in effort and attachment to outcome. Giving up means you stop showing up. Letting go means you stop trying to control what was never yours to control. That's a very different thing. You can work hard at something, give it your full attention, act with integrity and commitment, and still release your grip on how it turns out. You can love someone deeply and still accept that they may choose a path that doesn't include you. You can pursue a dream passionately and still recognize when the season for that dream has ended. Letting go isn't about abandoning responsibility. It's about releasing entitlement. The Stoics believed that your responsibility ends at your effort. Once you've acted with wisdom and discipline, the rest belongs to reality. If you continue clinging beyond that point, you're no longer acting, you're resisting. And resistance is exhausting. Think about how much energy it takes to keep pushing against something that has already shifted. A relationship that has emotionally ended but hasn't formally closed. A job that no longer aligns, but you're staying out of fear. A version of yourself that you've outgrown but still defend because you've invested years into it. Sometimes we stay not because it's right, but because leaving would mean admitting change. Letting go forces humility. It asks you to admit that something has run its course, and that admission feels uncomfortable because the ego likes continuity. It likes consistency. It likes saying, "This is who I am, and this is what I'm doing." But life is seasonal. The Stoics understood that everything moves in cycles. There is a time to build and a time to release, a time to engage and a time to step back. Wisdom is knowing the difference. If you keep forcing something beyond its natural lifespan, you don't prove strength. You create friction. You turn effort into strain. Letting go, in contrast, is alignment. It's recognizing that your energy is better spent on what you can still shape, rather than what has already solidified. And here's the quiet paradox. When you let go properly, you don't feel smaller. You feel lighter. Because you're no longer carrying something that no longer fits. You're no longer negotiating with reality. You're cooperating with it. And that's not quitting. That's clarity. Clarity that your value is not defined by one outcome. Clarity that your identity is not tied to one chapter. Clarity that your life continues beyond what just ended. When you let go in this way, you don't collapse. You transition, and that transition is not weakness. It's maturity. 7. The ego can't let go. If letting go feels difficult, it's rarely because of the event itself. It's because of what the event does to your ego. The ego is the part of you that builds identity around roles, achievements, relationships, and narratives. It's the voice that says, "This is who I am." And once it locks onto something, it doesn't release easily. Not because it's evil, but because it's afraid of shrinking. When something ends, the ego doesn't just see loss. It sees humiliation. It sees rejection. It sees a threat to the story it carefully constructed about you. If the relationship ends, the ego whispers, "You weren't enough." If the career path collapses, it says, "You failed." If someone walks away, it says, "You lost." And so you hold on, not to the person, not to the job, not to the plan, but to the version of yourself that was validated by it. That's why letting go feels personal, because the ego takes everything personally. The Stoics understood this subtle mechanism. They trained themselves to separate events from identity. Something happening to you does not define you. Something ending does not erase you. But the ego blends the two together so tightly that they feel inseparable. It says, "If this falls apart, I fall apart." But is that true? Look back at the earlier versions of yourself, the identities you once defended so strongly, the high school self, the early career self, the person you were in a past relationship. Those versions felt permanent at the time, and yet they dissolved. And you're still here. The ego hates change because change dissolves the illusion of permanence. It prefers to maintain control of a fixed image. It wants to be right. It wants to win. It wants the narrative to end in a way that confirms its importance. That's why sometimes we keep arguing long after the argument is over, or keep chasing closure from someone who has already closed the door, or keep replaying moments where we felt wronged. It's not resolution we're seeking, it's ego repair. But here's where Stoicism shifts the ground. Your worth is not dependent on the preservation of a storyline. You are not your success. You are not your rejection. You are not your reputation. Those are experiences that pass through your life. They are not the core of you. When you begin observing the ego instead of obeying it, something changes. You start noticing how much of your resistance is driven by pride, by fear of looking weak, by the desire to be validated. And once you see that clearly, the grip softens, because now letting go isn't about admitting defeat. It's about stepping outside the ego's demand for control. The ego says, "This shouldn't have happened to me." Wisdom says, "It happened. Now who do I choose to be?" That question is liberating, because it shifts your focus away from protecting an image and toward shaping your character. And character doesn't need applause. It doesn't need narrative consistency. It doesn't need to win every chapter. It just needs to remain steady. When the ego quiets down, letting go becomes less dramatic. It becomes less about losing face and more about gaining clarity. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You don't need the story to bend in your favor. You simply release what no longer aligns, not because you were defeated, but because you are no longer defined by it. And that's where freedom begins. 8. Pain comes from the story you tell. There's the event, and then there's the story. Most people never separate the two. Something happens, a breakup, a betrayal, a failure, a rejection. That's the event. It's real. It hurts. But almost immediately, the mind begins building a narrative around it. And that narrative is often far heavier than the event itself. You don't just experience a breakup. You tell yourself, "I'm unlovable." You don't just experience failure. You say, "I'm not capable." You don't just face rejection. You conclude, "I'll always be overlooked." The Stoics were clear about this distinction. The event is outside you. The judgment about the event is inside you. And suffering grows in that space between what happened and what you decide it means. This doesn't mean pain isn't real. It means interpretation multiplies it. The mind hates uncertainty. It wants coherence. It wants a clean explanation for why something happened. So it fills in the blanks quickly. And those explanations tend to be personal and absolute. This always happens to me. Nothing ever works out. People can't be trusted. The mind turns one moment into a lifetime pattern. And once that story hardens, it shapes how you see everything afterward. You stop responding to the present moment and start reacting through the lens of the old narrative. You become defensive in situations that aren't threatening. You expect disappointment before it arrives. You hold back in relationships because you've already decided how the story ends. But here's the quiet truth. Stoicism invites you to consider, what if the event itself was neutral and the pain is amplified by the meaning you attach to it? The Stoics practiced examining their judgments, not suppressing emotions, but questioning the conclusions drawn from them. When something painful happened, they would ask, "What exactly occurred, and what am I adding to it?" For example, losing a job is an event. The story might be, "I'm a failure." But that story is optional. It's one interpretation among many. It could also mean, "This path wasn't aligned," or "I need to adapt," or simply, "Circumstances shifted." The event is fixed. The interpretation is flexible. And that flexibility is where your freedom lives. When you begin noticing the narrative forming in your mind, you gain space. You realize you are not obligated to believe every story you generate. You can feel the emotion without cementing it into identity. Pain says, "This hurt." The story says, "This defines me." The first is human. The second is constructed. Letting go often means rewriting the story, not erasing the event. It means acknowledging what happened without attaching a permanent identity to it. It means allowing experiences to remain experiences. instead of turning them into conclusions about who you are or how life works. Over time, this practice changes how you relate to suffering. You stop dramatizing every setback into destiny. You stop expanding a single moment into a lifelong label. And when the story softens, so does the pain. Because the event passes, but the story only continues if you keep telling it. And once you realize that, you begin to see how much of your suffering was sustained not by what happened, but by the narrative you kept replaying long after the moment was gone. 9. Detachment brings power. Most people think detachment means indifference. They imagine someone cold, distant, emotionally shut down. But that's not what the Stoics meant. Detachment isn't about not caring, it's about not being controlled. There's a quiet strength in someone who can care deeply without collapsing when things shift. Someone who can love without clinging, strive without desperation, engage without losing themselves. That's real detachment, and it brings a kind of power most people never experience. When you're attached to an outcome, you become tense. Your mood depends on it. Your confidence rises and falls with it. You overthink. You overreact. You negotiate with reality, and that tension leaks into everything you do. But when you loosen your grip, something changes. You still act. You still try. You still invest energy. But your emotional stability no longer hangs on the result. You become calmer, clearer, more deliberate. You stop chasing and start choosing. This is why detachment creates power. Imagine walking into a conversation where you desperately need approval. Your words tighten. Your posture shifts. You monitor every reaction. You're not grounded. You're negotiating your worth. Now imagine walking into the same conversation knowing that your value doesn't depend on how it goes. The difference in energy is immediate. When you don't need something to validate you, you stop bending yourself around it. The Stoics practiced detachment because they understood that attachment creates vulnerability to chaos. If your peace depends on praise, criticism will crush you. If your identity depends on success, failure will destabilize you. If your happiness depends on someone staying, their departure will shatter you. But when your center is internal, you can experience highs and lows without losing balance. Detachment doesn't remove emotion, it regulates it. You still feel disappointment, but it doesn't spiral into identity crisis. You still feel joy, but you don't cling to it in fear of losing it. You still engage with life fully, but you do so with open hands, not clenched fists. There is something undeniably powerful about a person who isn't desperate, not desperate for validation, not desperate for outcomes, not desperate for control. They move differently, they speak differently, they carry themselves with steadiness. And here's the paradox. The less you need something, the more capable you become of handling it wisely. When you're not emotionally hostage to the result, your decisions improve. Your reactions slow down. Your clarity sharpens. Detachment creates space. And in that space, you regain choice. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond intentionally. Instead of clinging, you observe. Instead of panicking, you adjust. That is power. Not domination over others, but stability within yourself. The Stoics weren't trying to eliminate desire or ambition. They were trying to ensure that desire didn't dominate their internal state. They wanted to participate in life without being owned by it. When you reach that point, when you can act without desperation and release without collapse, letting go no longer feels like weakness. It feels like sovereignty, and sovereignty is the quietest, strongest form of power there is. 10. Everything is temporary. If there is one truth that makes letting go easier, not easy, but easier, it is this: everything is temporary. Not just the painful things, the good things too. The Stoics constantly reminded themselves of this, not to become cynical, but to become awake. They trained their minds to see the passing nature of all experiences, so they wouldn't be shocked when change arrived. Because change is not the exception in life. It is the rule. The season you're in right now will not last. The struggle will shift. The joy will shift. The relationship will evolve. Your body will age. Your perspective will change. Even the intensity of what you're feeling at this moment will soften with time. And yet, when we are inside an experience, we treat it as permanent. When we are in pain, we say, "This will never end." When we are in love, we say, "This will last forever." When we are successful, we assume stability. But life moves. The Stoics observed nature carefully. Trees lose leaves, weather turns, tides rise and fall. Nothing in the natural world clings to a fixed state. Everything cycles, everything transforms, and we are part of that same system. The problem begins when we demand permanence from a world built on transition. We want certainty. We want guarantees. We want to freeze moments that feel good and erase the ones that don't. But time doesn't negotiate. Once you deeply accept impermanence, something subtle changes inside you. You begin to hold experiences differently. You appreciate them more when they're here, and you panic less when they begin to shift. If you know a moment is temporary, you stop taking it for granted. You stop postponing gratitude. You stop assuming you can always come back to it later. At the same time, when pain feels overwhelming, remembering that it too is temporary gives you perspective. This is not your entire life. It is a chapter, and chapters close. The Stoics used this awareness as a stabilizer. When something good happened, they enjoyed it fully, but reminded themselves it was borrowed. When something difficult happened, they endured it, knowing it would not define the entirety of their existence. Impermanence doesn't make life meaningless, it makes it precious. It also makes attachment irrational. If everything is shifting anyway, why exhaust yourself trying to freeze it? Why build your peace on something that is already moving? Letting go becomes less about loss and more about alignment with reality. You're not forcing change. You're recognizing it. You're not giving up on something permanent. You're acknowledging that permanence was never promised. And once that sinks in, your grip softens naturally. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped demanding that the present moment remain untouched by time. You begin to move with life instead of trying to anchor it in place. And that movement, that quiet cooperation with change, is where a deeper kind of calm begins to grow. 11. The freedom on the other side. At first, letting go feels like loss. It feels like something is being taken from you, a person, a plan, a version of the future you once held tightly. It feels like emptiness, like something important slipped through your fingers. But what most people don't realize is that on the other side of letting go, there is not emptiness, there is space. And space is freedom. When you stop gripping what was never guaranteed, your nervous system settles. The constant internal negotiation ends. You no longer wake up replaying what could have been. You no longer fall asleep rehearsing imaginary conversations. The mental tension that once ran quietly in the background begins to dissolve. Because you're no longer arguing with reality. There is a specific kind of fatigue that comes from resistance, from trying to reverse what has already unfolded, from holding on to something that has clearly shifted. When you release that resistance, the fatigue lifts. You don't necessarily feel ecstatic. You feel steady, and steadiness is underrated. The Stoics understood that true freedom is internal. It's not about controlling events, securing outcomes, or making sure life unfolds according to your design. It's about being able to remain stable, no matter how it unfolds. On the other side of letting go, you realize something important. You are still here. The relationship ended, and you're still here. The plan collapsed, and you're still here. The chapter closed, and you're still standing. The thing you feared losing did not destroy you, and that realization builds a new kind of confidence. Not the loud, ego-driven kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that says, I can handle change. The kind that trusts your ability to adapt. Letting go strips away illusion, but it reveals resilience. It shows you that your identity is not fragile, that your worth was never tied to a single outcome, that your peace does not require perfect circumstances. When you stop clutching, you start breathing. You move through life lighter. You engage without desperation. You love without possession. You strive without panic. You begin to understand that participation in life does not require control over it. And perhaps the most unexpected freedom of all is this. When you let go, you stop living in reaction. You're no longer reacting to the past. You're no longer reacting to imagined futures. You're responding to what is in front of you, calmly, deliberately, without the weight of unfinished attachment pulling at you. That is sovereignty, not dominance over others, not flawless outcomes, but mastery over your inner state. On the other side of letting go, you don't become empty. You become clear. Clear about what belongs to you and what doesn't. Clear about what you can influence and what you must accept. Clear about who you are without the attachments that once defined you. And in that clarity, there is peace. Sometimes there is nothing left to fix, nothing left to argue, nothing left to chase. There is only a quiet decision to release. And in that release, you don't lose yourself. You finally return to yourself.